Welcome to Season 2 of Telling Tales. This season we meet up with some old friends and make some new ones. I'll take you on adventures through time, visit mysteries and answer questions such as where does Mustafa Khan go next? And what happened to John Paul Doherty? Welcome to Telling Tales Season 2, written and presented by me, Jeff Price. The shame. Screams could be heard throughout the Dungannon workhouse. Mary McGlade might have been a sturdy farmer's daughter, and since she could walk, she'd worked in the fields, picking potatoes and hacking peat from the sodden bogs of Mullagabore. But this was her first child, and although she'd helped her mother push her brother into the world, this was different. It was 1869. There were no painkillers, little help from the midwives, plus the disapproving looks of the other mothers. Mary was alone and frightened. 5 months earlier, in the small McGlade farm, she took her mother's hand and said, "Mammy, I need to talk to you." Ellen McGlade hated conversations that started like that. Her son Michael had said the same words before telling her he'd found a job in England. Are you going as well? Don't leave me here. I've already lost a son. It would break my heart to lose a daughter as well," she told Mary. "No, Mummy, I'm not going to England or anywhere else." "Oh, you see, Mummy, I think I'm with child." Mary watched as the colour drained from her mother's face. But Mary," she stuttered. "How? Why? Who?" Joseph McGlade had little time for women's talk and seldom took any interest, but the shock in his wife's voice made him prick his ears up. He'd had so much he wanted to say. Things like, "But you're not married," or "Who's the little fecker who fathered your bairn?" But actually, feck was the only word that came out of his mouth. Mary and her mother were weeping. This was a tragedy of huge proportions. Not only unmarried, but as far as her mother knew, not even a boyfriend. Joseph stood over the two of them, and as calm as he could, he said, "Who?" Mary was his favourite. She could do the work of any man. She was a quick learner and could carry more peat than even her brother could. And this was not the future he planned for her. Mary looked coyly at her father and said, "William MacDonald." Now it was Joseph's turn to have the colour drained from his weather-hardened face. "Jesus Christ, Mary, a feckin' prod, how could you?" "Well, no daughter of mine is marrying a prod." "Don't worry, Daddy," Mary told him. "I told him all about it, and he wasn't interested. He even denied it was his." Joseph's face flushed. "I'll kill the little fecker." "No," Mary said as she took her father's hand. "His family owns the land we farm. His father is the local magistrate. We'd lose everything." Her father thought for a moment and said, Well, you'll need to go to Aunt Nettie's house in Dungannon. Tell Nettie everything. She'll see Father Craven, and the nuns will find a good home for the bairn." And so the next morning, Mary set off to Dungannon. By the time Mary had walked there, she was exhausted. The shame within her was agitated, and her legs felt like jelly. The weather had been kind to her, and the rain that had sodden the fields overnight had held off long enough to let her stand bedraggled and tired outside Aunt Nettie's cottage. Mary took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Nettie was her mother's oldest sister. She had a haberdashery shop on the high street of Dungannon, which she ran with her friend Anne. The two spinsters also shared a house together. Nettie opened the door, and in an instant a huge smile broke across her face, and she flung her arms wide and said, "Mary, how wonderful to see you! You must be exhausted. Come on in. Just sit there, and I'll put the kettle on. Anne'll be back soon. It's grand to see you. But what brings you to Dungannon?" Mary pulled a letter from her bag. "Daddy wrote this for you, but Mammy said the words." Nettie sat down at the table beside Mary and opened the letter. And as she read, she kept looking up. Eventually she said, "Oh, Mary, you poor thing, such a tragedy. Don't worry, we'll sort this out. Your mammy wants me to talk to Father Craven, and he'll get the nuns, and they'll see to the bairn for you. The workhouse has a hospital, and they'll look after you when your time comes. You can use the spare room. It's full of junk now, but we can sort that out." "Oh, I couldn't do that, Auntie." "Yes, you can, and you will. Don't argue. Get some soup down, and I'll sort out something for you to sleep on, and we can talk more in the morning." Warmed by the soup and the welcome, Mary could feel the day catching up on her. Nettie said, "Don't worry, you're safe here." Over the next few months, as the shame grew inside her, Mary made herself useful around the house. A supper was always on the table when Nettie and Anne came home from the shop. Mary loved the vast collection of books that filled the shelves beside the range, including all the novels of Jane Austen, and even the latest talked-about book, Little Women. They opened up a world she knew nothing about. After supper, the three women would talk about the novels she was reading, and for every question they answered, Mary had a dozen more. What little real education Mary had was from her father. The school she had gone to as a child had done little more than teach her the catechism, and that bad girls go to hell. She left at the age of 12. Mary would lie in bed at night and rub her belly and talk to her shame. She would talk about the books she'd read, about how it was a girl she would grow up in a world where poor Catholic girls would have little to look forward to, but she wasn't going to let that happen to her. She thought she could be like the two spinsters and not be a cook in a baby factory for a man. She could have her own career, her own life, and not live in the shadow of others. As the baby grew, so did Mary's determination. If her child was a girl, then she'd have to save her from the nuns. Nettie and Anne had opened up a door and allowed her in, and now the world of Mary McGlade was changed forever. The midwives of Dungannon workhouse were not known for their kindness and empathetic attitude. They were paid a pittance for each delivery, and a finder fee from the nuns for each unwanted child passed along the line. It was 6 o'clock the next day when Mary awoke. Every bit of her ached. "Where's she?" she asked the woman in the next bed. "The bairn? She's in the nursery room. It's just down there." She pointed to the doors at the far end of the room. Mary slowly raised herself up, carefully put her feet on the floor. The shock of the cold flagstones sent shivers through her body. Her breasts ached, and her cotton shift was stained with leaking breast milk. "Where are you going, Mary McGlade?" said Sister Concepta. "To see my child." "Where is she?" "You can see her shortly. First, I need you to put your mark on these papers." "I can read them, sister. I wasn't born in a hedge." Mary picked up the papers. It said the child had been named Mary McGlade. "Who named my child?" she said. "We did," said Sister Concepta, "and Father Craven baptized her last night. She's a strong girl. We've already found a good home for her. She'll have a good life with a proper family, not as the bastard child of a Newry bog whore like you. Now sign it." "I want my baby. I didn't spend 9 months growing her in my belly and 10 hours pushing her out just so you could sell her to a stranger." Mary pushed Sister Concepta aside and headed for the nursery. All the other mothers on the ward were now listening. An angry nun is an awesome sight, but a Newry farmer's daughter with shoulders like an ox standing up to a nun was a wonder to behold. A nun was taking a baby from a cardboard cot. Mary could see the name Mary McGlade scrawled on the outside. "Can I have my child, sister?" Sister Magdalene looked up at the bedraggled mother. Her cotton gown covered in blood and baby milk, her black hair matted and tangled. "I'm taking Mary to a new home," said Sister Concepta. "They have a wet nurse for her. She'll be fine." The door behind Mary opened, and Sister Concepta pushed her way through. "You need to let her go. Get out of the way." Mary spun around. "Sorry, could you just let me hold her? Just once, please." Sister Concepta paused, and then nodded to the other nun. "Just a minute, then." "Thank you, sister." Mary's tone was calm and conciliatory. Sister Magdalene passed the baby across to Mary. "Thank you, sister," she said. Mary walked towards Sister Concepta. "Look, sister. Look at her beautiful blue eyes, and her hair is as black as your heart." And with that she swung her free arm out and hit the nun so hard she staggered sideways before crashing down onto the floor. Mary walked calmly out and through the ward towards the outside door. The other mothers had heard the crash and the argument with the nuns and watched open-mouthed as Mary walked calmly out. Mary had little memory of the next few days. She did manage to get some clothes from Aunt Nettie's house. Before using the money her mother had pressed into her hand as she left home, and she managed to find a cart going south back home to Mulligabaw. It was a fine Irish morning. The sun was warm and the sky a rich blue. Although Mary could feel every rut and bump in the road, she didn't care. And little Mary was safe, and they were going home. It was almost dark by the time she reached the farm, and as she walked up that old familiar lane, she wondered what her father would say. He had sent her to Aunt Nettie's house so the pregnancy would go unnoticed, and once the child had been taken by the nun, she could come back. But now she brought her shame with her, and soon the whole world would see it. Mary didn't care, but she knew her father would. Little Mary was nestled in the folds of her shawl, suckling beneath her shirt and gargling with contentment. Her mother had seen her approach from the house and ran down the lane to greet her. And as she went to embrace her, Mary said, "Careful, you don't want to crush your granddaughter." Her mother froze. "Holy Jesus, save us! What have you done, Mary?" And for the first time Mary's eyes filled with tears, and she cried out, "I couldn't, Mummy. I couldn't give my baby to the nuns. She's beautiful. She's mine." Mary took her child out from inside her shawl and offered her up to her mother. "See, Mummy, she has your eyes and Daddy's black hair." Ellen looked at the tiny child, her face still red and bruised from the birth, and she understood. "Come away, child. God only knows what your father's going to say, though." It was already dark when Joseph came home. His back was aching, his hands raw, and he was hungry. And as he entered the house, he saw Mary sitting by the range with his wife. His face lit up. "Ah, Mary, you're home. I've missed you." And he walked towards her, his arms wide open. Mary stood up and moved towards her father. "Daddy!" Her eyes began to fill with tears. "Daddy, there's something I need to—" Her voice trailed off as the unmistakable sound of a hungry baby came from the corner of the room, and Joseph stopped in his tracks, spun around. "What the feck is that?" "That's your granddaughter, Daddy. Say hello to little Mary." Mary picked up the baby, who was unaware of the trauma she brought into the world and only wanted the comfort of her mother's nipple. Joseph looked at his daughter and her child, then at his wife. He had so much he wanted to say, but all he could say again was "feck." He turned and went out the door and back into the darkness of an Irish night. "Give him time, Mary. He'll come around." But the next morning, Joseph hadn't come around. "Mary, you can't stay here with your shame." "Her name is Mary, not Shame." "Shut up!" Joseph stamped his foot. Mary had never seen her father so angry. She bowed her head and held her child close. "You have to hand your baby over to the nuns. They'll take care of her. I love you, Mary, but you can't bring that child up here. You have to go back to Dungannon and sort this out. Ellen, give us some money to get the coach back. I'm going to the fields now, and I want you gone by sunset. And don't come back with that child." Once again, Mary McGlade knocked on Nettie's door. As she travelled the road to Dungannon, she had prepared what she was going to say, but as soon as Nettie appeared, she burst into tears, and between the sobs she told Nettie and Anne what had happened. Nettie took her in her arms and said, "You know, you'll always be welcome here. Anne was just saying last night how she missed your cooking and our talks at night. We'll find a way." Mary wrote to her mother and told her what was happening, that she longed to see her, but no reply came. Joseph had forbidden her from replying. "She is dead to me," he said, "and to you as well." Mary's brother, Michael McGlade, looked into the empty eyes of his wife Bridget. "She's gone. I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." Dr. Edmonds put his hand gently on her face and with a practised stroke closed her eyes. Michael McGlade tried to think, but thoughts would not come, just grief. He had lost his wife, his children had lost their mother, and the world of light had become a dark and frightening place. "What am I to do, Doctor?" Michael McGlade was 18 years old when he packed a bag and headed off from Mullagabore to England. A friend had sent him word that a new chemical works in Gateshead were looking for workers. It was only 3 years beforehand that the terrible potato famine that had gripped Ireland had ended, and although the McGlade family had managed to survive intact, there were few opportunities in Newry for a young Catholic man like him, and he kissed his mother goodbye and left. Now all he wanted to do was to see his family again. He wanted to sob in his mother's arms. He wanted his father's strong hands to hold him up. But in the hospital there was no comfort, just the grief that was tearing his heart apart. "Time to go home." Michael felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up. "Your children need you. You've got to come back." John was his neighbour and his friend. His wife Bernadette was minding his 2 children. Michael summoned up as much strength as he could and bit back the tears and said, "Feck. Be strong for your family, Michael. Grief is an unwelcome guest. There's no place for it in your home." "How will I work and look after the children?" "We'll find a way. There's always a way," John said. It was early in September when there was a knock at the door, and the postman stood there thrusting a letter at Ellen. "From England," he said. "It'll be that boy of yours, Mrs. McGlade." "Indeed," she replied. "Doing well, is he, in that England?" And though he was talking to her, his eyes were scanning the room behind her. Very well. He's been promoted to foreman and has 2 lovely children now." "And your Mary, she well also?" "Doing well, yes." "Good to hear, missus. God bless them and the bairns. Goodbye, Mr. Rafferty." And she closed the door in his face. She turned to her husband. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, that man is such a gobshite. Here, Joseph, you read this to me. My eyes are a bit weak this morning." Joseph knew his wife had never got the hang of reading. "The words just jump around," she once told him. He quickly scanned the letter, then let out a cry of pain. "Oh, God, Ellen, the fever's taken Bridget. She's gone." "Is he coming home?" Ellen asked. "No, but he needs help." Ellen slumped into the chair by the range. She longed to see her son, to hold him in her arms and to wipe his tears, but she knew she couldn't. Her place was here. She sat for a while, and then she said, "Joseph, I think I've an idea." A few days later, Ellen was standing outside Nettie's house. Mary McGlade answered the door with little Mary, now 1 year old, in her arms. "Oh, Mummy, I can't believe it's you." "Am I going to stand here all day? Are you going to invite me in?" "Oh, sorry, Mummy. Come in, come in. Oh, it's so good to see you." Ellen sat down at the table. "Let me hold her." Mary passed the little girl to her mother. "Oh, she's grown so much and she's so beautiful." And a darkness passed across her mother's face. The darkness Mary had seen before. "Oh, God, no, it's not Daddy." "Daddy is fine, still as belligerent, as stupid as ever." She took the letter from her pocket and passed it to Mary. "Mummy, the poor boy and the children." "Will you go? He needs you," her mother asked. "Of course, Nettie and Anne have been good to me, but there's no place for me and little Mary here. They'll be home soon. They'll be thrilled to see you." The next Saturday, Nettie, Anne, and Ellen waved goodbye to Mary and her child as they left for Belfast and the ferry to Stranraer, and then on to England. Nettie took Ellen's hand. "You'll go one day. They're not lost forever. It could be worse. It could be America. And God forbid, Australia." To find out what happens next to my great-grandmother, tune in to Season 3 of Telling Tales for the next installment of The Shade. If you enjoyed this episode, then please support my podcast by buying me a coffee. Click the heart logo in the top corner of the website page to donate. If you're on another podcast provider, then check out buymeacoffee.com and search for Jeff Price N3. Thank you. You can contact Telling Tales direct by emailing tellingtalesjeffprice@gmail.com. Until the next time, goodbye.